I'm Larry Goulder, and for many years I have been a professor at Stanford University, where I have focused on environmental economics and policy, particularly with a focus on climate change, as conducted in Sacramento here for California. And also climate change policy, such as it is at the federal level in the US. Also focusing on policies, exciting policies going on in China to reduce emissions of greenhouse gases. I'll start off by saying that we are facing an emergency in this country. The Trump administration is posing threats to science, to our Constitution, including the due process which the Constitution is supposed to guarantee. Also, threats to truth through distortions, falsehoods, the suppression of independent journalism, for example, barring the Associated Press from access to the Oval Office, whereas other Trump-leaning media organizations are allowed entry. Overall, I think it's fair to say that the Trump administration is threatening many of the most important things that this country stands for. Threats to research extend beyond threats to medical research, which we've had a lot of focus on in these and other rallies. It includes threats to environmental science, efforts to understand the threats to the environment, and to understand how to design useful policies to deal with environmental problems and help promote human health and well-being. Immediately after his second inauguration, Donald Trump initiated efforts for the United States to withdraw from the International Paris Agreement. This international treaty was hammered out by participation from almost every country of the world, including oil exporting countries such as Kuwait and Saudi Arabia. And the effort was motivated by science, in particular by studies that for several years had been amassed together, consolidated under the convening of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, to which I contributed. This panel, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, brought in scientists of many different stripes: ecologists, biologists, economists like myself, sociologists, atmospheric physicists, to try to figure out what we know about the extent of climate change, what its causes are, and what it costs to do something about it. For many years, the IPCC brought the scientists together and worked out an assessment of what really is happening and needs to be done. The central findings of the IPCC are, number one, that climate change is already creating very serious physical and environmental human damages, and will only get worse over time if we don't seriously reduce the trajectory of emissions of greenhouse gases. Number two, and importantly, most of climate change is caused by human activities, namely the production and emissions of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, and ultimately the oceans as well. And the third key finding, which is actually a more positive finding, is that the benefits from countries taking measures to reduce emissions of greenhouse gases actually exceed the cost of doing so. It's net beneficial. In contrast, President Trump has referred to the Paris Agreement as a ripoff. It is not a ripoff. It is an investment that has a very significant positive return. Why? Because the benefits from avoiding the climate damages in the form of increased severity and frequency of hurricanes or wildfires, avoiding sea level rise and the problems from that, avoiding the loss of biodiversity, also avoiding premature death from heat. All these benefits have a value greater than the cost of doing something to avoid them. Beyond denying the science related to climate change, the Trump administration seems to be trying to prevent us from even being aware of the problem. As you may know, the White House reports now are not allowed to even refer to the term climate change in them. Moreover, just yesterday, it was announced that the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration is no longer permitted to assess the damages from human-caused climate change in terms of natural disasters. We're not allowed to even find out more about the problem. So what you might ask, what's the Trump administration doing? What is it supporting related to climate? Well, I'll briefly mention just two things. Number one, it's trying to revitalize the U.S. coal industry. Its periodicals refer to, quote, in fact, President Trump refers to, quote, beautiful, clean coal. That's a contradiction in terms. There is no clean coal. In fact, from coal emissions, the combustion of coal, you get emissions of sulfur dioxide, nitrogen oxides, carbon monoxide, various particulate matter, which does a host of problems, including respiratory problems, problems to human health, premature mortality. It's estimated, estimates vary, but they center around $100 billion in human health costs in the US each year. Now, Trump claims that coal is a potentially vibrant industry. Not so. You might ask, why is it that the US coal industry has been declining? It's not because of excessive or even any real regulation. It's because it turns out that there's been a remarkable decline in the cost of alternative ways to generate power, namely wind power, solar power, geothermal energy. Incredible reductions, more than an 80% reduction in just the last 8 years. And studies indicate, you can consult the National Academy of Science reports or the Union of Concerned Sciences, or even Forbes magazine, which is hardly a liberal journal, they will tell you that using renewable energy is cheaper as a form of energy to produce new energy than coal. So it really doesn't, the reason that the coal industry is fading is because it's just too costly to generate power from coal. And that's even before taking into account the health costs. Once you add in these other costs that aren't in the market, it's way, way, way more expensive. So that's one problem. And it is important to acknowledge the cost to workers in the coal industry as a declining industry. That's a serious issue. And I think the answer to that is not to try to prop up the coal industry again, but rather to provide transition assistance through various forms, including tax breaks and subsidies, to those workers so that they can find alternatives. Okay, so that's one main thrust of the Trump administration, coal. A second main thrust is reconsideration, and in many cases, the outright removal of controls on air pollution. The head of the EPA, who was brought in by President Trump, is Lee Zeldin. Very recently, he triumphantly announced, quote, "Today is the greatest day of deregulation our nation has seen." And he referred to the reconsideration and in many cases the rollback of 31 controls on policies that are in place, have been in place to limit emissions of mercury, of air toxics, and airborne particulates. He claims this would lower costs to American consumers. I think it's fair to say that the administrator is using a very perverse notion of cost, one that entirely ignores the human health costs. Now, to be fair, some of the regulations are not ideally designed. There's a lot of red tape. There is some waste. But the solution is not a wholesale removal of these important regulations. They are critical. Rather, it's to help improve their design to give firms more flexibility in how they can meet the limits on emissions. Much of my own work at Stanford over the years has focused on that, how to find ways to achieve our goals in terms of reducing air pollution at lower cost through improved design of regulation. Okay, so how's it all put together? This is just a sampling, but a very worrisome one. All in all, the Trump administration is rejecting environmental science, as well as science-supported international and domestic environmental policies. And to do that, to offer that support, they are employing what I would call a perverse economic analysis to claim, falsely, that rejecting these policies will reduce costs. So I'll conclude by asking a question that you're probably asking yourselves. What can we do? What can we do to reverse these frightening trends? Well, let me just make one suggestion. Many of you might already have have figured this, but I think raising awareness of what's actually going on to counter the false propaganda is very important. We've noted with a little bit of encouragement that President Trump's approval ratings have been consistently falling. And thanks in part to events like this that helped spread the truth. We gotta hope that that continues, that that trend continues. And I will mention two benefits from that. Number one, to the extent that public support, grassroots support in various congressional districts, including currently red districts, that raises the prospect that during the midterms, we can vote out the folks that are continuing to support these terrible environmental and other policies. And a second benefit actually applies to possibly affecting the decisions of the incumbent Congress people. After all, why is it that Republican legislators at the federal level are so supine and continue to bow to Trump? I think it's fair to say that at least one important factor is they're afraid. Lisa Velasquez says she's afraid. They're afraid that if they oppose him, they will lose his support and then lose their jobs. Well, if Trump's approval rating continues to fall and he no longer has the support at the grassroots level, then opposing Trump at the federal level, if you're a legislator, no longer comes at that cost. You can oppose Trump and keep your job. Not to say that's the only consideration, but there can be an effect at the incumbent level as well. So, to conclude, let me just say that I hope that we all will continue to engage, to learn more, and to spread our awareness, our knowledge of what is happening, and hopefully change the composition politically in this country. I think that may be, if not our best hope, one of our best hopes for reversing these terrible trends. Thank you very much.